Is Matt Caddo with the American Kratom Association. And our chair, Matt Salmon, has joined this evening. And we're going to talk a little bit right at the outset about the election results and how that might influence the policy on Kratom that we're struggling with at the federal level, particularly as it relates to the FDA and how a change in administrations might impact. So, Matt, let you and I just jump right in on that and
That's
talk
good.
what's happened. Obviously, with a change in administrations, typically what happens, you've got a 3 to 6 month period where they change the players in the administration. We're going to see a new HHS secretary, a new FDA commissioner, a new director of the Centers for Disease Control, which for the first time in 2025 will be subject to Senate confirmation. You'll see a new NIH director, and you also see a lot of the sub-cabinet level presidential appointees who have great influence on policy coming in. The unusual thing in this particular transition is the speed at which President-elect Trump has started to name his nominees. And obviously, we've got a new HHS secretary that's been nominated. And if confirmed, obviously, will have a significant influence on what happens with policy, health policy at the FDA, particularly with the issue of the positions that RFK Jr. has taken on a number of health issues. So it promises to be a turbulent time. So based on your experience in politics, Matt, kind of give us a view of how you see this thing playing out over the next several months.
Well, I think that he is acting at a lot quicker pace than he did the last time round, and I think part of it is because he's probably been thinking about this for a very, very long time, and probably had some ideas in his head going into this. Whereas last time he had no experience with Washington D.C. or the federal government whatsoever. I obviously he has 4 years as a sitting president, and I think he's going to demand people that uh, really go along with his ideology and his philosophy. And I think that's pretty evident. Most of the people that he's just appointed seem to be folks that have, been uh, Trumpers, MAGA folks all along. And I think that obviously the Senate is going to be an interesting place to do business. John Thune, who I know very well, I served with him in the U.S. House, is not what you would call a Trump guy. The guy that the Trump world, really was pushing for was Rick Scott, the senator from Florida. But Thune, has a lot of experience. He's been the number two guy in the Senate for a very, very long time, the whip. And so he knows leadership. He knows how to hit the ground running. You've all probably heard that Trump put a lot of pressure on the Senate to let him do recess appointments so that they would not have to stand before the Senate and get approval. Now, the one thing about his appointees is that they need just a simple majority. And from what I've heard, I think his strategy is actually pretty interesting. In that, and I'm just going to throw it out there, Mac. You and I talked about it, but I think that the pick that he's made for Attorney General, Matt Gaetz, is somebody that he knew would be so controversial. He's very, very disliked in the House by pretty much everybody. There might be a couple of people who like him, but he's pretty much universally disliked. And I think that he's probably a throwaway, and he probably has appointed him to be Attorney General, or at least nominated him to be Attorney General, so that his others will go through a lot smoother. The way things happened in the Senate, and Mac knows this, he was a staffer in the Senate, is that, the Senate's only going to stand up to him so many times, and I think that this will probably bode a lot better for JFK Jr. to actually get the nomination. I think a lot more people are a lot more opposed or have a problem with Gates than they do with Kennedy. In fact, Kennedy seems to be getting some support on both sides of the aisle, from what I'm hearing. There's a lot of people on the Republican side that believe our healthcare system is pretty screwed up, and that the FDA is way beyond broken, and needs to be, and I don't mean this literally, folks, so don't take it that way, but blown up and rebuilt over all over again. And that's just what JFK is promising to do. So I don't know. I won't go on too much longer, Mac. I'm interested in what your thoughts are.
So I'm hearing that RFK Jr. is going to be someone that will make it through. It will be a little rocky for him, but the interesting thing is that people are telling me that they think that it's a chess match that Trump's playing at this point, where he's invoking this recess appointment deal in order to signal that he's not going to tolerate the months and months, in some cases 2 years, before he got his appointees approved by the Senate last time. Now, obviously, much different Senate that he's dealing with now. I think the leadership that Thune will provide will be very important to make this transition as smooth as possible. Obviously, politics is at play. So their thinking is, excuse me, from some of my friends, they're telling me they thought it was a brilliant chess move by Trump to threaten the this recess appointment just to signal the Senate if that's where we're going, he's willing to cash in on that. But this is a much better, smoother process just by them actually in regular order dealing with the nominees. And I think you're right. The Gates is providing some cover for RFK Jr. But the interesting thing that I'm hearing, and I think it's probably got some real legitimate thought, is that there's going to be, just by the announcement, a downstream impact both at HHS and at the FDA for career employees. There are some people who, as a matter of principle, at those agencies who will not stay. Otherwise, they have a cushy job that they're actually allowed to stay in. No one can fire them, at least under the current rules. But people are saying, I'm just not, as a matter of principle, going to work for RFK Jr. or for Trump. Uh, I'm hoping that some of the people that are in the way at the FDA for us fall into that category. But even if not, I think the significant thing is the pool of potential FDA commissioner candidates. Because as a practical matter, typically an FDA candidate is someone who's pretty insulated from politics. And they come from the academic world or they come from the scientific world and the medical professions, and they really aren't part of the day-to-day rough and tumble politics that some of these other nominees would be. And those kinds of people, that pool of candidates traditionally it just falls right into sync and under, I would call it, the spell of some of those career employees at the FDA. That's why the senior policy person at the FDA who sits in the commissioner's office and who is anti-kratom gets to do the same kind of disinformation campaign, one commissioner after another. And I don't think that's going to be the candidate, that an FDA commissioner this time. They're going to come in with, if they accept the nomination, they're going to come in with a different mindset about whether the FDA needs to be dismantled, because certainly, and when I say dismantled, that's what RFK Jr. is saying, is that
Mhm.
there are whole divisions at the FDA he thinks have to go in order to make America healthier again. We have an interest in that we want to make certain that the policy that is reflected by the FDA towards kratom actually does help make America healthier again. And there is a potential really for that to happen. But at least I think we're going to have an FDA commissioner that's going to be less captured by this pool of FDA career staffers. And there's likely to be a migration, an out migration of FDA staff to go find jobs in the industry, private sector, because they doesn't matter principle, as I said, they just don't want to work with RFK Jr. or with President Trump as he comes in. So interesting set of potential issues that could be positive for obviously the kratom world. And I think another thing that's true is that as we negotiate with policy decisions down on Capitol Hill, particularly with the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act, the Democrats in the Congress and in the Senate tend to be a tad more protective about the FDA than do Republicans. Republicans are willing to look a little harder at some of those issues and not just give deference to the FDA. And so you have this sea change that happened in the judicial world where the Supreme Court threw out the Chevron doctrine, which allowed judges or required judges to accept the administration agency's view and interpretation of laws. Now that's gone, and now I think you have a configuration in the U.S. Congress as it relates to kratom that will get a more of a fair shake in evaluating what the policy ought to be. So I think there's some exciting times ahead for us as we go
Hey,
forward.
hey, Mac. Having served in the U.S. House, I remember sort of back in 1995 when Newt Gingrich became the first Republican speaker in 40 years, and one of the big agendas, clear back even then, was major FDA reform. Now, the frustration then was how long it took drugs and devices to actually get to market, and the idea that Europe was so much faster in moving life-saving drugs at more breakneck speed to get it, out into the public. But I can tell you that there's a strong sentiment among Republicans that the FDA needs some major reform. So I think Kennedy's probably going to get a lot of support on that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. But I'll tell you, one of the most frustrating things about the current commissioner and the career staff there is their intransigence about kratom. I sent a letter on behalf of the American Kratom Association and kratom consumers in America 2 months ago to Commissioner Califf. Now, interestingly, I ran into him sitting in the departure lounge at Dulles Airport on my way to a meeting, and the seat was not occupied next to me, and Commissioner Califf sat down just by chance. I introduced myself. I told him that he and I were pen pals, but he wasn't a very good one because he never answered my letters. Well, lo and behold, I get a response to a letter that I sent 2 months ago this week in the mail. Now, unfortunately, it was from a staffer, and equally unfortunately, it didn't address any of the questions that I had asked. I had requested that we have a public stakeholders meeting where we could have scientists and representative consumers come to the table and sit down and have a discussion with the FDA staff. And they refused that, but they did offer, and it's a glimmer of hope, did offer a listening session. Now we've done those before, haven't seen much action from them, but maybe the landscape has changed, and we don't want to pass on that opportunity. So we're obviously going to reach out and say we welcome this. We think it should be a public stakeholders meeting, but if we have to settle for a listening session, we can talk about what our specific concerns are, and at least it gets on the record from that standpoint. So everybody stay tuned. We'll keep you posted on how that interaction goes as Commissioner Califf winds down in his tenure as the FDA commissioner, and we start to have this new era of discussions and relationships with the FDA. Next thing I wanted to just reassure people and give all of our advocate community some information is the situation that we're facing with Facebook and Meta shutting down the American Kratom Association Facebook page and other groups that are advocating for it. There's some very significant disadvantages to our not having access to the search possibilities under Facebook. Many local jurisdictions rely upon Facebook in order to post up their agendas. It is, in many cases, the only way that we know if there is a proposed policy action in a local government. And by Meta shutting down Kratom, claiming that it is a drug, and therefore that we're involved in the commerce of drugs, is simply unfair. It is an infringement on the First Amendment rights of Americans to have open discussions. And frankly, they can't prove in any way that kratom is a drug because it's not. And that's already been well adjudicated with scientists. Even the FDA admits that it's a dietary supplement. Not that it cannot have therapeutic benefits, but until a manufacturer makes a therapeutic claim, that particular product would become a drug and be required to go through the new drug application process. But generally, kratom is properly marketed and consumed by Americans as a dietary supplement. So we think that that as we go forward here, that we'll win this battle. It requires us to file an appeal. Now, we have absolute incontrovertible proof that we're getting complaints being issued about our Facebook page at the American Kratom Association by Kratom critics. There are people on the Kratom Danger Awareness uh, Facebook page themselves that are bragging about the fact that they filed complaints. And specifically, one of the posters received a notice from Facebook where they had taken down, based on the complaint of that individual, one of our videos. And when you look at the video, it's not doing anything other than educating people about our position. Excuse me, I got terrible allergies this time of year. So obviously, we've got two issues here. One is the fairness and making sure that we get the people at Meta to listen to us and to hear it. But then you have the unfairness of the groups that are intolerant of any other viewpoint but their own, and they use disinformation that's being circulated by Kratom. And I think that in many senses, it's just disingenuous. I have made multiple offers where we could sit down in a video conference like this and have a discussion about kratom and about the potential the addiction levels, what the potential for a kratom causing a death with the kratom danger awareness people, and they have consistently refused. And it's because I don't know, they don't want to know the truth, or they don't want to have a discussion, or they just simply want to have this position where they're constantly yelling from the sidelines. But we have never tried to interfere with their ability. In fact, we've encouraged their ability to have open conversations. And it's interesting, Matt, as I watch the kratom danger awareness people, they talk all the time about how they want to have kratom properly regulated. Many of them want to have it banned, but most of them just want good regulations. That's what the American Kratom Association wants. And if we could find an open dialogue where we could talk about these things, I think the majority of the kratom danger awareness people would be in our camp because we want responsible regulations. It is the extremism of the leaders of that group who have decided they're empowered because they have the bully pulpit, empowered by making reports about the AKA to Meta, which we'll win on in the end. When they're committed to infringing on our free speech rights to have a different opinion than theirs is certainly discouraging in terms of the effort that we've undertaken to be open and as transparent as we can about these differences of opinion that we have. So in the interim, as we struggle through with this issue with Meta, we are asking everyone to watch your emails because we will use our email platform in order to inform all of you about what the issues that are arising, particularly as it comes to advocacy initiatives. So you'll know that what we're doing and how we need your help. Really important. And we're going to use Twitter or X and YouTube in order to communicate some of our messaging. So there'll be a switch in the platforms that we're using in order to communicate with the advocacy community. So everyone just stay alert to that, and hopefully you can respond to it as you go forward. Uh, and let's shift ground a little bit here and talk about the emerging proliferation of bans in local communities. Obviously, the FDA has learned a lesson, that being that they do not have the science in order to justify, under the rigorous criteria set by the Controlled Substances Act, to seek and get a scheduling of kratom under the Controlled Substances Act 8-factor analysis, which requires simply that they prove it, that they've got to have the scientific evidence that's necessary in order to meet the standards for the scheduling of kratom as a Schedule 1 substance. They've tried twice and failed. They tried a third time at the international level, failed there, even at a lesser standard. And so clearly, the science is not what is going to win the day for anti-kratom advocates nor for the FDA. They have not had a state ban kratom since 2017, when Rhode Island was the last state to be completely hoodwinked by the FDA on the promise that if they acted, that the Controlled Substances Act would trigger in at the federal level, and they would have a Schedule 1 classification of kratom. Didn't happen, and of course there hasn't been a subsequent ban, despite efforts that they've been directly involved in, the FDA, and that anti-kratom advocates have been involved in. They simply are impotent when it comes to those kinds of policy decisions because they don't have the evidence and data that's necessary to support it. But what they have found is that they have a robust communication channel that emanates from the FDA headquarters, and it uses a lot of shill surrogates like the Mayo Clinic and like the WebMD and like the Cleveland Clinic, all of which demonize kratom. Now it's interesting, and people should know it. The FDA has very strong financial ties to those institutions. In some cases, for example, the Mayo Clinic has signed an agreement and has a grant in order to improve the dissemination platform of health related information, and they're making millions of dollars a year to do it. So, why wouldn't they repeat on their platform the disinformation campaign against kratom? And it's a shame because the Mayo Clinic has never done one lick of science on kratom. They repeat the FDA's disinformation campaign, but they haven't done any science themselves. And that's a tragic thing for an institution that claims that they're committed to good science and they're committed to finding the truth in order to protect the public health of Americans. And it's really sad that that kind of thing is going on at this point. But the reaction that we now are challenged to have on these local bans requires us to dig a little deeper and recognize that it's a change in the way that we are going to have to approach the advocacy efforts for these local bans. And I think, Matt, you and I will both agree that going to these local communities makes it more difficult. And what the FDA has done is they've recruited the addiction recovery specialist, each one of which will stand up there and they'll say, oh, we're seeing a proliferation in the number of clients that come to us with kratom use disorder. What they don't say is, number one, they have a financial incentive to accept those people into their program that are struggling with these addictions. What they also don't say is that they don't have to treat them, or if they do, it's simply malpractice, with the same kind of drug regimens that are used for people that are truly suffering from a drug-related substance abuse disorder. Kratom use disorder, to the extent that it even has any validity in calling that, is not the same in terms of withdrawal protocols as you would for a dangerous drug. You simply use a common sense to approach it and a little abstinence, and within a week to 10 days, in most cases, you have a successful transition from kratom to the extent that a user has become dependent on it. But yet, the substance abuse community doesn't talk about that. They view kratom as, for what it is a threat to them having a robust business. It is what Nora Volkow, the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, called a harm reduction tool that potentially offers a pathway for people that are struggling with substance abuse to go into a normal life and to set aside those kinds of addictions using a substance like kratom, which doesn't have nearly the addiction profile. And by the way, the scientific evidence proves it. It's safe for human consumption. The FDA's own study, dose finding study, proved that. And while they're trying to walk away from it as best they can, or trying to cast it as a very limited kind of study, it proved that you can administer kratom to humans for the purpose of determining whether or not there is an addiction liability, which will take about 3 years in order to complete that study. But you cannot ethically provide to a consumer or to a test subject, a human subject, a substance that has not been proven to be safe for consumption. And that's a critical part of what we're doing. So the FDA's caught. They got red-handed in the cookie jar, and we're going to continue to fight back. But the way that we do that at the local level really requires boots on the ground. It requires our advocates to dig deep, to go and participate in these meetings where you can, where there is the opportunity for virtual attendance and participation in these meetings. We encourage you to do it. We're deploying a different strategy here, where we are going to get people there to represent the kratom community, but without the ability to identify where these local bans are taking place, it makes it more difficult. It's difficult for our enemies too, by the way. But we know that when our enemies show up and we show up, we win on the science. We win on the truth. We win on the fact that we know that these individuals that the FDA has targeted as being, this vulnerable population. And for those people that make claims about how dangerous kratom is, we can show with the science and we can show with real world testimonials that people are benefiting from kratom. And it's all about responsible consumption. You can hurt yourself with virtually any substance. It's about following the directions and it's about appropriate manufacturing. And that's why we advocate for the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. So this is a challenge for us. I remember back in 1994 when the FDA was vigorously opposing the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. They wanted to make all dietary supplements into new drugs. They wanted to have complete and total control over how you consume those kind of products. And they certainly didn't want an individual to be able to walk into a dietary supplement store and of their own free will and choice make a decision that impacted their quality of life and their health and well-being. The FDA wanted them to be able to do that. They wanted to have complete control over the substances that you consume as a consumer. When that was all going on, we were in the early stages of the internet and the emails and that kind of thing. It was very difficult to communicate. But what we found is that dietary supplement store owners would put black drapes over the dietary supplement products. And when customers came in and started looking around, they said, "What is this?" And they say, "This is what it looks like if you don't stand up and fight what the FDA is trying to do to us." And it was a remarkable outcome because you saw hundreds of thousands of people who wrote letters and who called their representatives. We need to adopt the same kind of one-on-one kind of advocacy when it comes to what we're facing now without the tools that are being stripped from us. And until they're restored, we have to be prepared to fight. And certainly at the local level, we need to show up and have our voices be heard. We can't be fat and sassy and rely on the success that we've had over the years because it's critically important that we be able to get those voices in front of these people. And all they can rely on is they Google kratom and they see what the FDA says and they see what the Mayo Clinic says and they see all of the awful stuff and they don't get to hear except by people who stand up at the microphone at these local jurisdictions and they tell their story. And that's what really moves people. So it's really an important part of our advocacy effort for everyone to rally, to help each other, to find ways to support one another, to make sure our voices, boots on the ground, get to those meetings and be able to have the conversation that's required by people who are well-meaning, who got elected to these positions, and they're open to the truth. Now, we do have some that are locked in because their local sheriff told them that kratom is bad. I'll tell you an interesting anecdotal story. I sat in a hearing before the Mississippi legislature when the director of the Office of Narcotics testified and said that he had observed young kids coming out of a convenience store, slugging down a bottle of kratom, and then immediately writhing on the ground in a seizure. That's what he said. I was stunned. Now, I wasn't allowed to say anything because I'd already testified, and under the rules, I wasn't allowed to say anything. But I caught this individual, this director of the the director of Office of Narcotics, and he was very interested. He said, "Look, you come back, I'll sit down with you." He spent 2.5 hours with me, and we walked through all of this. And he admitted during that conversation that he was relying on some reports from people under his command who had told him that story, and he couldn't personally verify it. And when I explained to him that the way that kratom works, it certainly wouldn't have happened. You walk outside, slug it down if it's a pure kratom product and start writhing in a seizure on the ground, unless it's an adulterated product or it's not kratom at all. And at the end of the day, he said, "Look, you've persuaded me. You're not going to see me in front of that committee again on this kratom issue." So I think that's what we confront is this misinformation that sits out there that we've got to really do some work on. Let's shift to the Rhode Island Leadership Summit that we just concluded. And Matt, we saw, I think, amazing reports from the scientists up there. Our purpose in going to Rhode Island was to have the opportunity to have Governor McKee's staff to sit and listen to the panel of scientific experts and to have them ask any questions they might have about what kratom's safety profile is, what its addiction profile is, and any questions they had about whether or not the next time that that bill lands on the governor's desk as to whether the governor should sign it or not. And I think we made great progress. Love to hear your impression, Matt, about how you thought that the summit meeting went with that panel of scientists.
Well, first of all, I was impressed at how deliberate the members of the governor's staff were, and that they sat there and participated. Also, we were fortunate enough to have the legislative leadership at the summit as well, which was incredibly helpful. My bet is that we're going to get the Kratom Act, the KCPA, through again this legislative session, and that the governor will sign it. Again, I feel really optimistic about it. But the several panels that we had, from the panels that were really focused more on advocacy to the scientific panels, I don't think they could have been better. In fact, we had a good cross section of folks from the scientific community that addressed virtually every issue. The overdose possibilities, which pretty much they said were non-existent. The addiction possibilities, again, which they said that they believed were, again, probably non-existent. But I thought that the good cross section that we had from science, the science community, really spoke for itself. But it was pretty phenomenal, and everybody that I spoke with who attended said that they believe this was the best one we've had yet.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we really heard some really incredible uh, information from these scientists. I learned something each one of these things, and one of the things that I picked up in the discussion on the issue of the Tampa Bay Times Deadly Dose series. I thought that it was a fascinating information sharing, and we obviously Dr. Marilyn Eustace has done a deep dive into each one of the claimed deaths, the 46 deaths, and she's found that, and this will all be revealed in a peer-reviewed published paper shortly. But she presented the information and the data, and the Tampa Bay Times was wrong. They are consistently wrong. Their conclusions are not going to get them obviously their Pulitzer Prize they were hoping for. It's likely to get them the Dunce Award because it was so horrendously biased in the way it was done. But in the course of that discussion, Dr. Eustace made the point that there are hundreds of new novel psychoactive substances that are now on the streets in America that there's no test for in standard autopsy proceedings. And so if someone is involved in using drugs and happens to have a product that's tainted with one of these novel psychoactive substances for which there is no safety profile, that person might end up in it with a death, and it will never be reported as anything but either a kratom death or some other problem that they have, no matter what the autopsy says. So really interesting kind of data that's coming out. We obviously evaluated in those panels the discussion of what the future of the kratom marketplace is going to look like in 5 years or 10 years. It's going to be significantly different. We're going to see products that appeal to the soccer moms shopping at Whole Foods. You're going to see retained in the marketplace the products that people find to have value in their lives and maintaining their health and well-being. We talked a lot about the strategies now to challenge the FDA, both legally and from a policy standpoint. We had a great session on 7-OH products. And I want to correct something, and we may get to this in the question and answers, and we are going to get to these before we're done tonight. But the claim that has been made by others who are anti-AKA people, and I will specifically call out the Global Kratom Coalition, the claims that are made that the AKA promotes 7-OH products is a flat lie. No other way to describe it. It is a lie. And they know it, by the way. Our statement about 7-OH is consistent with what the scientists tell us about the potential threat and dangers that it has. Where we have a disagreement is that we don't have one product to promote. We don't have one marketplace that we're trying to impact. And we're not trying to, at the American Kratom Association, trying to eliminate competition in the marketplace. That's vastly different than the strategy of this other group. But I can tell you this, that the problem that we run into is pretty simple, that the federal law says that any dietary supplement manufacturer who wants to place a product into the marketplace has to have a reasonable basis of safety under the conditions of use prior to market entry. That applies to every single product that's a dietary supplement. It applies to 7-OH products. My personal view, and I think it's been every day we get more information to prove it, that they didn't have that scientific basis prior to market entry. You can't catch up. You can't, when you get caught, scramble to find the information. And so I think it's important for regulators to be able to evaluate that. And I think that the reckoning will come as the FDA, if they get their bearings on this, and state regulators find their way to do it, will start to clamp down. Utah has already done so and eliminated 7-OH products. Now, we also had a similar issue arise with kava kratom products. And the state of Utah has also taken the steps to start to delist those. And I think that they're evaluating the science and safety data. But based on what I've seen so far, we don't see any of that evidence and data that was required prior to market entry to be available. You have to stretch to get there, because if you have a kava kratom combination product, and this was revealed by the scientist who participated in that panel, you can't do the catch up. You can't do it after you get caught. You have to have had it before you got there. And it was the assessment of the panel that discussed that there are serious questions about kava kratom products and whether or not they have a safety profile that would render them to be adulterated products under the definition of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and under the KCPAs that have been passed in the states. And so we're going to have to let that process play out. But clearly, they have the same standard. I can't say at the American Kratom Association, none of us can, that we don't like 7-OH, which we don't, and therefore they should not be allowed on the marketplace because we believe that's the case, and then say, oh, well, we'll give a pass to kava kratom products because they are subject to the very same standard. And that's what we want to see going forward as we work on these issues. And so you will be seeing reports that will be issued from the proceedings that took place, and those reports on each one of the sessions, as we're able to produce them, will be submitted or made public, and you'll be able to see for yourselves as you go along. But before we conclude and before we get to the question and answers, there's one other thing that happened in Rhode Island that deserves some mention, and that is that when the meeting was called, there was a staged demonstration against the American Kratom Association. That was, and when I say staged, there actually was an application put up a couple of days before our summit meeting asking for people to sign up as actors to be protesters at the AKA summit meeting. I tried to sign up, they wouldn't accept me. They paid $200 for people to come for 3 to 4 hours to hold signs. And when they were questioned, the people that were there didn't even know what they were there for. In fact, the staged reporter, who was obviously paid to be this actor as a reporter, couldn't even articulate who had hired her accurately. But it turns out it was the Global Kratom Coalition, Kratom Consumer, I'm sorry, the Consumer Council member David Breger, who was there. And he confronted me. I got there a little early before all of his paid protesters showed up. He and Joe Sokol, the podcaster, confronted me in the parking lot. And it wasn't a pleasant conversation, unfortunately, because immediately it became very contentious, where Mr. Breger said that I had disrespected his son and his death, and I wouldn't even apologize or say that I felt sorry for his son dying. And that just isn't true. I think that any family member who loses a son or a daughter or any other family member obviously is deserving of our empathy and our sorrow for that loss. The issue I have always said is that we just make sure that we give the truth to those family members, and that's what we seek. But Mr. Breger made it clear, and he said it to me directly. He said, I'm going to sue you, and the Global Kratom Coalition Consumer Advisory Council is going to sue you for defamation. I was a little surprised. I said, how so? And he said, because when you said that kratom doesn't kill people, you were defaming me because my son died of a kratom overdose. Now, I have no doubt that his son, he believes his son died of a kratom overdose. And I have no doubt that the autopsy report that was issued in his death, I've not personally seen it, so I don't know.
Mhm.
I can't speak to it. But he believes that it said it was kratom only. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it doesn't matter. I was not defaming anyone, and I certainly wasn't defaming him, nor was I defaming his son, nor was I defaming the Global Kratom Coalition. I have always consistently advocated that we need to find the truth in these areas and that we should work hard to do that. And the truth is found in the reports that are available, and then an examination of those reports to see whether the proper protocols were followed, whether or not they tested for all of the substances. I can tell you that in the review of the so-called 46 deaths in Florida, which were kratom only, in many of the cases, the tox screen report that was sent out by the medical examiner to the laboratory for an independent evaluation was asked to identify only one substance, metrogeny. So is it surprising that they would come back and say that's a kratom intoxication death? I mean, that's the kind of thing that happens. But the fact that there would be a staged rally, paid protesters by the Global Kratom Coalition Advisory Council members in order to come and attack the AKA and claim that we are supporting 7-OH products. And then Mr. Breger also said that he was not against pure leaf products. Now, that is contradicted by his website, where he says kratom kills. He's against extracts because he believes that his son died from the consumption of an extract that wasn't labeled properly. And he said there were 14, I think he told me there were 14 doses in the bottle, and his son took it all at one time, and that's what caused his death. And he's against extracts. He said it clearly is in his interview with the local television station. He said it again. He said it to me too, that he's going to get rid of these extracts. Well, he's entitled to that viewpoint, by the way. But there are millions of people that are buying extract products that are properly manufactured, properly labeled in the United States today, and they have the right to do so as long as the safety conditions are met. So this was an unfortunate circumstance. It followed the lawsuit that was filed by by Botanic Tonics. The founder of Botanic Tonics is the chair of the Global Kratom Coalition, and they sued the AKA and me personally, supposedly for the diversion of funds. In each of the allegations made in that lawsuit, we spent more on the project that Mr. Ross's Botanic Tonics company contributed, and we were ready and able to prove it. But the lawsuit's been withdrawn. No notice to us as to why, no indication as to why, and we're grateful that that happened, but only because it was a diversion from our true intent and purpose and activity, because we want to stay focused on what we're doing for the kratom community. This is a tragic time. I made the comment, and I believe it firmly, that the time has come for this kind of internecine warfare to end. We have always been open to discussions with the Global Kratom Coalition. I committed the unpardonable sin, apparently, when I opposed the California bill AB 2365, I think it was. We did so because it was one product, anti-competitive, and it was eliminating many products in the marketplace. It would have driven up costs for consumers. It would have eliminated mid and small size businesses. It would have destroyed innovation in the marketplace, and it was the wrong solution to the problem. And that bill failed, and I was responsible for it. And I guess that's why I suffer the end of the spear that Mr. Ross is now poking us with. These are things that can be resolved with good faith negotiations. We don't have to agree on everything, but what we shouldn't be doing is destroying this industry or this consumer advocacy platform because someone's mad at another person. And I told the vendors that were in attendance at our summit that the time's come for them to choose, because you can no longer stand on the sidelines when you see this kind of damaging activity that undermines the entire effort that every kratom consumer has advocated for. And it's time for there to be significant corrective actions taken in order to discredit those that are involved in this kind of activity. It's tragic that we're in this circumstance right now. It is unnecessary. It's an unforced error, and it certainly doesn't need to continue any longer. And the door is open for there to be a reasonable discussion about how we resolve these kinds of conflicts without it it being the kind of war that is going on right now. So I've said my piece on that. I have always told, and it's been consistent, and I believe it, and I want to tell the Kratom advocacy community that we will continue to work hard for you. We do not advocate for any product. We do not advocate for any company. We are not tainted by the fact that there's a self-interest in that. We operate on the basis that there should be a freedom of choice by consumers to walk into or to order online a safe kratom product that's properly manufactured, that has good labeling for the indications of use, and they should be able to do that without interference just because there's a competitor out there that wants to restrict the marketplace. We think that safety is the key, and we follow the science on that. And that's why we have these kinds of meetings. We had a congressional briefing that emphasized the science back in September. We've had a previous one back in December of last year. We emphasize the science, we follow the science, and we're not going to be cowtailed by someone that just wants to control the marketplace. And that you have my firm commitment, we'll continue to fight on. So having said that, we'll go to the questions and answers, and we'll try to spin through these. And I promise you we'll go through all of them. This is being recorded. And of course, if we don't get to them and you have a question that you want to have, you can certainly email us along the way. And before we do that, I'll just reaffirm something that's very important, and I think every one of us ought to be involved in. As much as it is frustrating to hear the anti-kratom advocates, we should be civil to one another. Where there shouldn't be the kinds of screaming and yelling that Mr. Breger engaged in with me. There didn't need to be that. We could have a civil discussion, though we disagree. There shouldn't be on online platforms just because you can do it sitting behind a keyboard to make uncivil comments, inappropriate comments, and call each other names and that kind of thing. It just isn't the appropriate kind of thing. I've succumbed to it a few times myself. I understand it. I know how it works. We just have to try to bridle our passions a little and try to be considerate of one another, because I think in the end we're going to get to the good place on this. So starting with the questions, Adam asked, will the AK establish communication with RFK Jr. if nominated, and how can that help us? We absolutely have that opportunity. The HHS is a big agency. I served as the chief of staff there, and I can tell you that it is like drinking from a fire hose. But there are a couple of ways in the nomination procedure where we have obvious attempts to communicate. One is through the one-on-one meetings that nominees go through with members of the help committee who will actually vote on the nomination. And then there's the hearing itself. We're hopeful that there will be advocates for kratom that will raise this issue and how the FDA has mishandled kratom in those meetings with the nominee. There's also questions not only in the public hearing, the nomination hearing, but there are also questions for the record, and we will be working hard to make sure that that all of the nominees, including RFK Jr. and whoever the FDA nominee is, whoever the deputy HHS secretary is, whoever the CDC director is, and whoever the NIH director, and even SAMHSA. So we'll work hard on making sure that that's happened.
What Mac's saying is we get a lot of bites at the apple.
We do.
Because there's going to be a lot of people that go before the Senate for appointment. And so we got a lot of chances to ask the questions.
Great. So Michael asked, do you think RFK being nominated can help encourage federal KCPA to be passed? I think that the stage has been set in a new administration for us to make real progress on the federal KCPA, because there's only so much time that the FDA can get away with stringing this issue out, and I think people are going to see that they've simply been unfair to the consumers of kratom. Michael also asked whether the AK Facebook page can be restored at some point. Absolutely. We've been through this before. We're facing bots right now and individual complaints, and we can overcome them with the science, and we'll be able to do that, and we'll work aggressively to do it. So here I have the anonymous attendee, and you're cowardly, and I know what you're trying to do is attack me personally. The question is, I'm hearing a lot of concerns you're not necessarily spending our money the way we think. Well, actually, we are. We have a board that oversees this. We're audited. What we don't do is we don't give the roadmap to our enemies about how we're spending our money, who we're spending it with, but we have integrity in this process, and we make sure that we are working hard at the American Kratom Association to spend contributions that are made by donors along the way. We don't publish who those donors are. We don't paint targets on the backs of people to go after them. We accept money from individual Kratom consumers, and all of you, some of you may think we ask too much, but we need that help. And we also accept money from vendors who are willing to align with our KCPA formula, which requires good regulation. We don't apologize for that because it's the way we win, but we don't promote one product over another, and we don't let those donors dictate what those policies are. They have to agree with us. We don't have to agree with them, and I think that's the way that we're going forward. And so you have the anonymous attendee who says, "Oh, how much is your family members making? My wife doesn't make a thing." Let me tell you something that's true about the way that in the kratom space, how you get started and what you do. It is hard to attract people to an organization that really doesn't have a shelf life that's very long. I mean, there's a possibility the FDA could shut us all down tomorrow, and so being able to attract people into coming to work has been difficult. During COVID, it was particularly difficult, and we've had criticism about how we didn't have an office during COVID. Well, we didn't, and there was a migration away from offices during that time, but now we have an office, and some of the information about that office is just completely bogus and wrong, showing the quality of the research that was done on it. But this is it. So this. This is the example. This anonymous attendee says RFK Jr. is a bigger a-hole than you. Well, thank you for very, very well-founded comments, and I cannot believe that this is what the Global Kratom Coalition is funding in part on some of these kinds of attacks. I'm not saying this individual is, but it's the kind of thing that we're engaged with. And then this non-attendee says, "Great shirt, you effing hypocrite." So this is what we're dealing with, and just understand that it doesn't happen on its own. It happens because there's an effort that is moving forward here. So,
Mac, I just want to interject because not only do we not promote anybody's product over another product, we're about the consumers. That's what this organization stands for. Our biggest priority is to protect the consumers.
there you go. And so I'm gonna let the anonymous attendee to continue their diatribe on these questions. So, um, uh, oh, the anonymous attendee says, "Do that with me about my son's death." So it's Mr. Breger. Mr. Breger is welcome to be here, and I would welcome the opportunity to have a civil discussion with him as well. And I can't imagine that the pain that comes with this, but I also am not going to allow someone to just weaponize their grief against us because they're not willing to be rational. So we're willing to do that, and I think it's really important that we somehow get off of that. Misty says recovery centers charge insurance companies for kratom use disorder as opioid use disorder. Great point, because it's a cash cow, right? Now, not that I'm told there are extreme examples, rare examples where someone could become so addicted to kratom because they have an addiction personality that it may merit some kind of intervention, but it would be a very rare case. It's not every person that comes through the door and says, "I'm using kratom and I'm addicted to it." Now, there are issues associated, and we're seeing it in some of the class action suits, and I can't speak to these things where there are mixed kratom products that are causing higher levels of addiction or dependency than we're used to seeing with pure kratom products. So that's something that's left up in the air, but this is just where we need to have some reasonable basis for there to be decisions made on how people are properly treated in those kinds of addiction recovery centers going forward. Um, Lloyd asked, "Who can I get a hold of in my state of South Dakota to speak of this and be sure we don't run into problems in the future?" We did have a banned kratom bill that was promoted in South Dakota, I think 3.5 years ago. We managed to defeat it, and I think we have a good solid basis there. I would love to have Lloyd, if you can reach out to your state representative that represents you or your state senator, contact them, tell your story, and if they have an interest, call me, and we'll figure out a way that we can actually get into their hands the information that would help them get the Kratom Consumer Protection Act passed. Heidi says there are few Illinois advocates are checking town agendas weekly for about 50 towns in the Chicago suburb. Heidi, thank you. This is going to be the way we have to do the research and dig deep in order to find out. Heidi asked, is there a better way to check local municipalities? And should we do this in other states? We're going to need to organize this kind of activity until we can restore our access to the Meta uh, uh, platform, which helps us. We also have just invested in a platform that will allow us to identify for those localities that put their agendas up on the internet anywhere. And we're hopeful that it's a fairly expensive program, but it's something we're going to need to do. And we'll be able then to identify and put this out. One of the inherent problems is that sometimes those agendas aren't published until the day before or a couple of days before the actual hearing date. And so we have to scramble all the time. But it's an absolutely great effort that you're undertaking, and we're going to organize around that and hopefully coordinate in a way that lets us identify those local issues. Misty said, make an appointment with your local sheriff and tell your testimony, give them the signs. Great point. We have just produced a set of talking points that will be available on our website, and we'll send out a link on our email that you can download, and we're going to add more to it. We've got, I think, 5 or 6 of them up that answer the basic questions that we hear. And then as we get more and as we supplement more information, we'll add that to you to that database, and you'll be able to download those and use it. So uh, where I think we're going to be in really good shape in getting this information so that you don't have to guess about what the science is or guess about what the right arguments are. And I think that's terrific. Uh, I've got I've got Mr. Breger going through a lot of um, in all this. One question is, do you support 708? I think I've answered that. Look at how many of your members are selling it. We don't have members. We have vendors who do support the American Kratom Association. We have what's called a GMP program, which doesn't look at products specifically, but rather looks at whether or not the manufacturing processes they use for their products meet or exceed current FDA guidelines for good manufacturing practices. That's all that program does. We are adding in some labeling. We are specifically putting into our Kratom Consumer Protection Acts for the future, starting in 2025, that you cannot label your product as Kratom if the predominant metabolite in the product is 7-OH, if it exceeds 2% or more of the overall alkaloid fraction of the product. So we're making steps on this, and we're going to continue to work on that. Dion says, Dion's thanking me Dion and I had a great conversation by email over the last couple of days. And I don't know if all of you know Dion. You should. I'm certain you've heard of her. She's one of the most remarkable Kratom advocates that I have been privileged and blessed to ever meet. She's a wonderful person. She has suffered beyond measure, and throughout her afflictions, has been such a tremendous advocate for Kratom, and we are all in her debt. I think we honored her as one of our Hall of Fame members, and she deserves much, much more than that. So, Dion, thank you. And she reached out to me with some concerns, and we had a great conversation along the way. Lloyd asked, what are 7-OH products? Great question. The Kratom plant does not have 7-hydroxymetrogenine in it in its natural form. 7-hydroxymetrogenine is a metabolite that forms after the leaf is picked and it starts to dry out. And it's accelerated as you apply heat, which can come from the sun, or if they're in actually drying beds, and 7-hydroxymetrogenine starts to form in the leaves. When those leaves are then ground up, 7-OH retains through it. It also occurs when you ingest a kratom product that the kratom metrogenine, the predominant alkaloid, converts in your liver to 7-hydroxymetrogenine. And scientists believe that 7-OH contributes to the effects that kratom has that are beneficial. But what we can't have is a level of 7-hydroxymetrogenine that is higher than the 2%, which the scientists have told me is a safe level, because then you put an extra burden onto the body. And so it's up to those 7-OH manufacturers who are using the predominant compound of 7-OH in their product to document its safety profile under the conditions of use. You can have a very potent product, and as long as it's labeled properly and limited in the way it's used, and the best example of that is caffeine. Caffeine is the most widely used psychoactive drug in the world. And there are limits about how much concentrated caffeine you can have in a product. A quarter teaspoon of caffeine can kill you. And so that's why when you drink a Diet Coke or you drink a cup of coffee, it's very limited in terms of the caffeine content. And the FDA has established what a daily intake of caffeine is safely consumed can be. We think the same thing has to happen for kratom and for 7-OH. And so we're looking forward to this. So I think as we go forward here, uh, we'll hopefully see science come out and we'll be able to see appropriate uh, FDA action on this, not the bias that they have against it. And that's just where we are. Uh, the anonymous attendee is going through all this stuff. Um, let's see. Marilyn said she criticizes the anonymous questioner. I know, and it's already identified himself, Mr. Breger. And Mr. Breger, I've told you, I'm willing to have this discussion if it's civil. It doesn't seem very civil right now. Um, and so there you have it. Melody says, so individually, do we have any recourse with Facebook? Right now, my understanding of this is that their bots have picked it up. Now they put in an algorithm. Bots are some kind of a high-tech term that they're searching for terms. And so when they find kratom, then they flag it, and then of course it gets evaluated probably by a human somewhere, maybe offshore. So I think that for people that experience and get flagged by the by Meta or by Facebook, then you appeal it and then just see where it goes. I think that this is difficult. There are workarounds to this that we shouldn't have to go through, where you don't spell it, and this is the kind of thing that we really are working on in order to make sure that these things are properly handled by Meta, and we're working hard right now to try to get their efforts on it. So John asked, how do we know the difference between 7-OH and genuine leaf when it comes to tox reports or a drug test? Uh, Dr. McCurdy made the point in our congressional briefing in September that one of the problems is that when a medical examiner sends out for a tox screen, submits a blood test, they're not testing for 7-hydroxymetrogene. And that's unfortunate because if there is a high concentration of 7-OH in the bloodstream that could be a suspect compound in the death, if it's not tested, it'll come back as metrogeny because that's its root derivative form. And so unless the test is applied for 7-OH, and let's say it comes back at some high level of nanograms per milliliter, then we would know that that is not a pure kratom product, but rather a 7-OH product. So it's important for us to fight these battles because at some point the medical examiners will have to be more precise in the way that they identify the causes of death. And here's the important thing when it comes to our evaluation of the autopsy reports along the way. In the way that we looked at the deadly dose Tampa Bay Times series and adopted their methodology to get to their result, it was then that we sort of unbundled it and found out how weak their methodology was. In some cases, not their fault, it was the medical examiner's protocols. We can influence medical examiners as they start to evaluate the manner of death or the cause of death because they want the truth too. It's an easy out to say, oh, metrogeny pop, the FDA says it's bad, therefore I'm going to call that a metrogeny death because I can't explain it any other way. We need to have options that allow them to test for the other things that might have been the cause of that death, and that those things are important. So we'll continue to work on that and do what we can in order to promote this. Robert says he just thanks us for the AK for doing the work. I think I've told people many times that when I first was recruited to come and work for the AKA, I was the first one to say you have no chance to beat this because there'd never been a rescission of a scheduling request using the emergency power section of the consumer. I'm sorry, the Controlled Substances Act. But because they wanted to rush it through, the FDA used that emergency powers, which means it was only going to be in effect for 2 years. And so I made the argument to the AKA, you'll be down for 2 years, but you can build the science, you can be ready when they have to come back for a full-blown, final, and permanent scheduling. I was wrong because I didn't know this community. I didn't know that there were going to be tens of thousands of people that would rise up and say it's wrong. I didn't know there'd be 146,000 people that would sign the We the People petition at the White House website. I didn't know that Matt Salmon would not only agree to help when he was a member of Congress, but he would lead 51 members of Congress to sign that letter in a 2 week period telling the DEA not to schedule it. And he got 26 Republicans and 25 Democrats. That's amazing that that happened. And I didn't know that in the Senate you would have Orrin Hatch on one end and Bernie Sanders on the other signing this letter, showing that this was a public policy issue on behalf of the American people. So we're going to continue to fight this battle because we're on the same platform of bipartisanship. This is not about politics. This is about how we are going to successfully allow Americans to have a choice that is of a safely formulated product going forward. So that's just where we are. Uh, Caro says, I'm aware that major kratom vendors on the AK GMP list are not following KCPA labeling laws for multiple years. Well, the GMP program until January of this coming year didn't require labeling. It just looked at the manufacturing processes. And so that's all we could do. And those were validated either by you having a FDA food establishment registration and permit, or you passed an independent third party audit. So that is required annually going forward. And we think in 2025, with GMP 4.0, there will be specific labeling requirements for the products, and that will tighten down on some of these products that I think that are out there, including any manufacturers that are making 7-OH products or combination products with mixtures of other substances. Craig asked what legislative tracking platform we're using. We've tried them all. We're currently, excuse me, using Politico Pro, and we also have a lot of information we get from another platform that we use that identifies. It's not its primary purpose to identify legislation, but lets us do it in quorum. It's called. So we're having good success with the state KCPA and kratom legislation, really trying to drill down now into the local areas, and we think that quorum can help us do that. Um, Misty said, read David's comments, expose them. Everybody can go through and read these comments for themselves. I think that, uh, again, let's be civil and again, understand the pain that this family is going through and understand that they feel passionately about this. I think it's sad that they got misled a little bit as a channel for that, but they're entitled to their viewpoint and they're here tonight. We didn't block them. We didn't take them off. And even when they put up what I think are absolutely unhinged, profane comments, we're not going to do it. Take them down because we think that they're allowed and they can do it. And um, they have the opportunity on their own platform with the Global Kratom Coalition because they are on the Global Kratom Coalition's Advisory Council, Consumer Advisory Council. So we can be as sorry as we can for the loss of any family member, and I am, and I know most of the kratom community is. It's just hard when you get this kind of vitriolic response when we're not trying to call out anybody for being anything but being interested in this. Um, Misty makes a great point. If you're taking synthetic 7-OH products, you're their lab rat. I think that's a very interesting comment because the truth is that and I've not personally done it, but if you take a 7-OH product, they say the onset of the effects are faster and more powerful. No doubt about that because it's a highly concentrated form of 7-OH and it does bind directly to the mu opioid receptors. And if you listen to the scientists who have evaluated this, they say that it has the same effects that an opioid does, which is why it argues for the FDA to intervene in these kind of things. So it'll be interesting to see where we are on that going forward, but we certainly want to encourage it. Philip asked, what area of research do you think is most lacking or needed for the kratom field right now? Philip, this is an absolutely great question. As I sat and talked to the scientists that participated in our summit meeting in Rhode Island. And then prior to that, in September, when we had the congressional briefing, it was fascinating to hear their perspective on what's needed. Their human clinical trials are the gold standard for safety. Human clinical trials are extremely expensive, but what ones have been done by some companies, which is a fabulous investment for every one of us, is that they take the what do they call it? Bob Durkin, the former FDA guy, keeps calling whatever the it is, but they take the product itself and the article. That's what it's called, the technical term. They take the article, which means that this is a kratom product that has 25 milligrams of pure leaf, or 40 milligrams, or 80 milligrams, whatever that is, and they test it for safety, and they do a protocol which shows that that person over an extended period of time takes that kratom dose level, serving size, and then they measure blood levels. It's really complicated, very expensive, and involves lots of people, ideally, in order to get it done. So more human clinical trials will help us in order to validate what the FDA has already documented, which is that people can safely ingest kratom up to 12 grams in a 5 minute period. Now, do the math. That's 12,000 milligrams of kratom product ingested in a 5 minute period. And at that point, they saw a mild adverse event in the FDA study, which was experienced not only by the kratom subjects, but also by the placebos, because that much plant material in that short a period of time is going to cause you to vomit. And that's what they saw. But they saw enough of that at that high level without any serious adverse event that convinced the FDA people they could move forward. So that research would be important, but it's very expensive, and we get it that very few companies are willing to make that investment. So short of that, we need to see more of the dose finding with at various levels. There was no dose finding done on extract products. We need to find that out as well. I think that's an important um, criteria because, frankly, a extract product, as long as it is using an extract methodology that's approved by the FDA, which means it limits the power of the alkaloids that can be produced by the extraction methodology, has proven to produce safe products. But we don't know if you're using a novel approach to that extraction. So what we need to do is find out with human studies, dose finding studies, that extract products can be consumed safely by people. So that's another area that's very important. Now there's some interesting uh, comments been made that are anecdotal in terms of informing us that we may want to look at some studies on drug-to-drug interactions. What drugs are you taking right now that you should not be taking with kratom at the same time? The Washington State University's University of Washington, Mary Payne, researcher out there, started this effort. More needs to be done in that area because that will inform us. And now, what happens typically is if the FDA identifies an adverse event that's associated with the consumption of a prescription drug, they'll issue a black box warning order to the prescription manufacturer because that's the best control. If a doctor prescribes this medication to this patient, they should not be taking kratom. So the standard for that is in the FAERS database. It's called the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System, and it's a crude tool, meaning that anybody can report it. So you could report an adverse event to the FAERS database, and what the FDA, because they don't verify every complaint, doctors provide information, companies provide information. Under law, they're required to do so. They tend to be more complete in terms of their evaluation because they have to do an investigation and report on the investigation. So the FDA looks for clusters of a kratom consumer having an adverse event when they're taking a antihistamine or an antidepressant or some other prescription medication. Then they'll identify where there's a problem, they'll investigate. And frankly, the FDA does a good job at this, and they'll be able to then issue that black box warning, and we'll know whether or not, and we can help inform the public. Don't take kratom if you're taking these prescription drugs. So that research is very important too. And then there's a lot more, but I'll tell you one other one that to me seems very interesting, and that is what the effects that kratom's alkaloids, and there are 50 plus alkaloids in the kratom plant. We know the most predominant ones are about 4 or 5. There might be 8, depending on which scientist you talk to, that have a contributing effect to the symphony of the effects, as Dr. McCurdy describes it, where you've got all of these alkaloids playing whatever role they play, and you can't just require one to kind of stand out and just blare out because it ruins the symphony. So maybe these other alkaloids all have a contributing synergistic effect in terms of what kratom does for consumers. So I think more research into the interactions between these alkaloids and why if you isolate one alkaloid, it might not produce what we think is a safe product. Dr. McCurdy made a very interesting point. Again, I tell you, I learned new things as I talk to these scientists in our congressional briefing. in September. He said that they found research now that as the farmers in Indonesia are harvesting kratom leaves, that if they pluck a immature leaf, that there's a higher level of speciosylotine in the leaf because after the leaf fully matures, it converts to metrogenine. And speciosylotine has a different safety profile than metrogenine. And that's why we need to know more about whether or not a concentrated speciosylotine product might have a safety profile that's different than metrogenine and what that might mean if we're picking the leaves sooner and not realizing that they are now a predominantly speciosylotine batch of material as opposed to metrogenine. So more of that research needs to be done to guide the Indonesian government that's taking steps to regulate kratom more precisely in terms of its exporting, and that the vendors themselves can test for it as they go forward. So that's sort of where we are. Cami, sorry for that long-winded answer. Cami asked if someone has an ongoing lawsuit concerning a death claim by law, are they required to show a full tox screen? And if not, how come? The laws in various states are different in the sense that whether you have to release an autopsy report. But in a lawsuit, it's a different standard. When you have a claim made about a death being caused by a substance, then the other side, the defense, is entitled to see all of the evidence that is based upon which the allegation is based. That means you get to see everything. Now, whether the tox screen was done appropriately, whether all of the substances that the person was taking were accurately identified, whether the protocols that were followed were appropriate, those are all things that are fair game in those discussions. But they all just get they get evaluated in the end in a court proceeding, and obviously that's part of the process. Glenn asked, "Who's the guy on YouTube that rambles on about me?" Well, there might be many of those people, and I'm not a perfect person. I get that, and people can have their personal feelings. I can assure you that I do my best. We get up, I get up every day and I work hard to try to make sure that we're doing what we can to protect the creative marketplace. We have a small staff. We don't have the reach that we'd like to have. It's unfortunate we get diverted into some of these other nonsensical things that go on. But that's life, and we just take it as it comes. But Glenn, thank you for your support. Edie asked about what about North Carolina? We were not successful in getting the Kratom Consumer Protection Act passed in North Carolina this past legislative session. At the last minute, when we thought we were in very good position to move forward, there was a report by a constituent of an influential senator about an alleged kratom death. That issue's been resolved, and we think that we'll have a better path going forward. And so we're going to work on hard in North Carolina because we had the stage set. We have an excellent team of lobbyists there. We think that we're in excellent position to regulate kratom the way it should be regulated in the marketplace going forward. Misty asked, is there any update on the Kratom Safe Veterans Program? This is a setup question, Misty, and you know it. John Shinholzer, who is on the call tonight, I don't know whether we can elevate him to be a panelist, is our new director of the Veterans for Safe Kratom Program. We know that as Jack Bergman, who is a former Lieutenant General in the Marine Corps and one of our co-sponsors in Congress of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, is a strong advocate for veterans to have access to kratom products in managing their acute and chronic pain, particularly for those that are wounded soldiers. And so John is leading that effort. It is a fabulous effort. And so we're thrilled to have John join us in a stronger effort to lead out with veterans. John himself is a Marine. I made the mistake of saying a while back that he was a former Marine, and John's able to be LA. John, tell him what you said when I said you were a former Marine.
Yeah, well, that's just it. I'm a Marine till I die, man. I'm just not on active duty no more. But I thought you said, yeah, former Marine. There's no such thing as a former Marine.
I stand corrected.
Yeah, and you did a good job of getting standing corrected too.
So tell us about your view of the Veterans for Safe Kratom program.
Well, very simply, veterans have a special place when it comes to policymakers because we are that group of people who did sign that blank check, including up to our life. So, we fought or served for our freedoms and liberties. So, there's a bunch of us out there. We just got to somehow find out who you are, sign the go on the AKA website, sign up so we can contact you. Because when we go through these localities and up against these municipalities and the state level, these policymakers, they want to see their constituents show up and testify. They get tired of these carpetbaggers coming down from inside the beltway. So we have to be, politics is local. We got to find our local people, our local advocates. It is time to suit up, show up, be that face and voice of Kratom. And it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight, but we're slowly building some momentum up, and I'm just so excited to be part of this mission.
Well, John, thank you. And I got to tell you that in this work that we're doing, we run across some great people, and you're at the top of that list. And I'm just thrilled that you're willing to stand up and be a part of this effort going forward. So here's the real test for you. We've now recognized once a Marine, always a Marine. Troy just said to me, "Thanks for everything you do," and he said, "Go Steelers." And he's the main man tonight. Go Steelers. Having grown up in Pittsburgh, and one of my claims to fame is that of all my kids, 6 kids that grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, every one of them's a Steeler fan. And one of my grandsons called me one day, and they lived in Boston at the time. And he said to me, he said, "Poppy," he said, "it's Patriots Pride Day, and I have to wear a Patriots t-shirt to school." He said, "But I want you to know I'm wearing a Steeler t-shirt underneath."
Good boy.
His parents raised him right, so that was great.
Good.
So Adam asked, any updates on the new Indonesian regulations? We're already feeling the pain. This is a difficult issue. We're working closely with the Indonesian government. They were under the misconception that if they were to put in a set of very good regulations that would control the quality of the supply chain of kratom material from harvesting to point of export, including good testing of it, that would convince the FDA to lift the import alert. And I'm not a very good lobbyist because I couldn't persuade him that was not going to make a difference, because it won't. The FDA has a different agenda, but they are implementing these new regulations. It has caused disruption. It's going to increase the cost of the kratom raw materials. One of the good things from it is that it will, in a very turbulent marketplace, protect the farmers. Because they will get a fixed amount of money for their crop. Now, I would prefer that to be competitively based, but competitively based without the import alert, because with the import alert, it created a complete disruption where the farmers would get paid a very small amount of money up front because the brokers were taking all the risk. The risk meaning they had to ship it to the United States, and they would only get paid by the vendor if first it arrived in the vendor's facility in order to distribute it to manufacturers. And then they had to test it to make sure that it was met the minimum quality standards and wasn't contaminated. So that disruptive supply chain put this huge risk on these brokers, who then were making the money, but they were squeezing down on the farmers. We think that gets eliminated with this. There's a 6-month window before we can implement changes that we're recommending to the Indonesian government. I've got a call with the Indonesian people tomorrow night. We have them pretty regularly. We're trying hard to educate them about the proper way to do this. And we think that the Indonesian government, the new government that just got inaugurated in October, is going to be inclined to help us here in Washington through their embassy people in working with the State Department, the Department of Commerce, and the FDA, hopefully a new, more receptive FDA, and we'll be able to smooth out some of these problems. But there'll be some pain in the interim, and that's unfortunate because it wasn't well thought out in terms of its downstream impact and their belief that it was going to move the FDA going forward. So this is just one of those things that we're involved in. Stephen asked, "You know who's initiated the Kratom Consumer Research Project being undertaken by Johns Hopkins that's offering some money to participate?" I'm not familiar with who's funding that project, but this research is important. And so you can evaluate each project on your own, decide whether you want to participate. But I think Dr. Kirsten Smith, who is a really high quality individual who really wants to find the truth about kratom, is someone that when she does a study, support it. Same is true for Dr. McCurdy. Same is true for Mary Payne at the University of Washington. There are numerous people that are involved in this battle that are conducting studies. when I say involved in the battle, they're trying to find the truth. We have different objectives. We're trying to find a good policy solution. They're trying to find the truth about the science. And we welcome it because we believe in the science and we think science should dictate our policies as we go forward. So that's our goal as we move forward here. Um, any word on the New York KCPA? I heard Mike Lawler is in favor of the federal KCPA, so thought it would be good news for us New Yorkers. Uh, New York is an interesting state, I'm finding out. And I go to various state capitals and I go visit with legislators. And the one thing about New York is they have a different process for evaluating legislation. They're less interested in hearing from in testimony at hearings. It's really more input from individual consumers to their legislators, and that gets then evidenced in the evaluations that are made at hearings. So not a lot of testimony in those situations. So we've adapted to that, and we think that we've got a real strong level of support and one of the finest lobbyists, that former State Senator David Carlucci, that's helping us there. So I think that is important. And I'll tell you, if we could clone someone in New York, it would be Bud Smith. Bud has, at huge personal sacrifice, has traveled to Austin. Is it no Austin? What am I saying? Albany. See, I got my states confused. Traveled to Albany on multiple occasions and made the booth as legislators came by and made visits to the offices. He's the kind of advocate that just exemplifies the message that we have. And not everybody can do what Bud does, but just to follow him, to follow that kind of commitment, he's an amazing guy and a fierce advocate for us. And this is where all this other nonsense, all the attacks and all of the tension between the organizations, all of that gets washed out when you see someone who's sincere like Bud, sincere like Misty and Heidi, and all of these many advocates who really take the step above the personal issue about Kratom benefiting them, changing their lives, saving their lives, whatever those things are. These are people that are making a difference in our community, and I can't tell you how magnificent it is to see them do their work. We're coming up on the last couple of minutes of the webinar here, and I think we've exhausted the questions other than some of the more vitriolic things that are on there. But I can tell you that just to close this out, our objective here in the next week or next year is I think we're going to have a very good run at getting the federal KCPA passed with an administration that is going to be more receptive to Kratom, and the unique opportunity that the nomination of RFK Jr. provides for someone who is more attuned to dietary supplements and the value they have in people's lives. We're going to have to do some education with him on Kratom. When we look at the platform that the NIH has through the NIDA with Nora Volkow is a fabulous platform for the truth getting out about the potential harm reduction potential of Kratom. I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think a little bit of cleaning out the FDA and the old guard out there that is anti-Kratom will make a difference. And it all comes down to one thing and one thing only, that the science proves that Kratom can be safely administered, and that properly formulated and equally important, properly labeled Kratom products can help people. And even the most ardent critics, with the exception of a few extremists, are going to admit that that's true, that Kratom can help people and maybe help their loved ones and for a time. And it's not the silver bullet. It's not the perfect thing for everyone, but for those that want to take advantage of it. And it's like Dr. Giroir said in his withdrawal letter of in August 16th of 2018. If you have not read that letter, you need to get it. And it's on our website. Read it, because he makes the argument that he evaluated the science that the FDA provided, and he saw the huge gaps in that science. And he laid out the roadmap for the FDA to use if they truly wanted to make the case as to whether Kratom should be scheduled or not. And they've had since 2018, all these years, and they haven't done it. And why? Because they cannot, because the science won't justify it. And that being the case, then let's find a way to regulate it. So it doesn't have to be a controlled substance to regulate it. Regulating it makes sure that we have safely manufactured and properly labeled products that does, in total, protects the American consumer. And that's what we're about, and that's what we want. So I'll close there. Matt, I'll turn it back to you if you have any closing comments. And John, if you want to, let's go to you first. If you want to have any closing comments, rally the troops, and then we'll go to Matt.
Well, the last thing I want to say is, I don't want to estimate the value of loved ones and family members of Kratom consumers in the respect for advocating. So when we go to these hearings, when family members and loved ones show up and say how Kratom impacted their loved one and helped, improve the quality of life, that's very important as well. So I just want to mention that.
Amen. So Matt, any closing
Yeah,
comments from you?
yeah, in virtually every hearing that we've had, both local and federal, uh, the winning arguments have always been by real Kratom advocates, people that have had an opportunity to benefit from Kratom, or as has been mentioned, family members, and that's what's going to win it for us. And so, please, keep being involved because we need you more than ever.
That's great. And for people that want to fill the gaps on information, go listen to the Kratom Gals podcast series every Saturday. It's a wonderful program that Misty and her colleagues get engaged in some fun and very informative advocacy. I know there's a Kratom Testimonies podcast. You can learn about all that with Kratom Gals. I encourage it, and I think we'll do our best to continue to share information. Look for your emails. Make sure that you stay in touch. We'll give you the landing spots for how you can find it out. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Have a great week as you go forward. See everyone later.